Manchester United didn't improve by fixing their football, they improved by admitting they weren't ready to control games. In 2026, the squad is still unbalanced, the identity is still unfinished, the rebuild is still incomplete, but one thing disappeared: panic. Games stopped breaking, mistakes stopped spreading, pressure stopped multiplying. This isn't progress you celebrate, it's progress you survive. And that's why this rebuild finally feels real. Between Matchday 8 and Matchday 20 of the 2025-26 Premier League season, Manchester United didn't resemble a team moving forward. They hovered outside the title race, they lacked consistency, their goal difference remained clearly inferior to Arsenal, Manchester City, and Liverpool. On paper, this looked like stagnation, but football doesn't collapse on paper. It collapses inside moments, and those moments began to change. Compared to the 2023-24 season, United suffered fewer multi-goal collapses, fewer stretches where one mistake became 3 chances, fewer late goals conceded after the 70th minute, the phase where panic usually finishes games. The most revealing example arrived recently on 25th January 2026 against Arsenal. United conceded first, early enough to trigger old instincts. In previous seasons, that single goal would have distorted everything. Lines would stretch, pressing would become emotional, players would try to recover control individually. Instead, nothing escalated. The defensive block stayed compact, the midfield resisted the urge to chase, the tempo slowed instead of accelerating. United didn't dominate the match. They didn't suddenly look superior, but they survived the moment, and that distinction matters. Because this wasn't a rise in quality, it wasn't confidence, it wasn't belief, it was restraint. Same squad, same ceiling, a completely different emotional response. Manchester United didn't start improving by adding ideas. They started by removing behaviors. And that subtraction, not the results, is why this season needs to be understood differently. Because once a team stops breaking under pressure, every other phase becomes possible. The reset didn't come with a speech. There was no manifesto, no declared new era. But during the 2025-26 season, Manchester United quietly changed how they thought about control. For years, the club tried to solve instability by adding structure, more patterns, more triggers, more ideas layered on top of players who were already overloaded. The result was predictable. When pressure arrived, decisions slowed. When decisions slowed, shape dissolved. In 2026, that logic was reversed. United reduced noise. Not just tactically, mentally, the team stopped asking players to hold multiple ideas in their heads at once. Pressing schemes were simplified, positional responsibilities became clearer and more conservative. The margin for interpretation shrank. This shift didn't make the football prettier, it made it repeatable. One of the influences behind that change was Michael Carrick. Carrick's football understanding was never built on domination. It was built on sequence control. He understood something basic that elite teams often forget. Before you can play better, you have to stop making the game difficult for yourself. Control in that framework isn't about where you stand, it's about what you can repeat under stress. So United stopped chasing coherence through ambition. They stopped trying to look like a finished team. Instead, they limited decisions. They narrowed choices. They accepted that stability had to come before expression. That's what made the reset dangerous. Because once players know exactly what they're responsible for, pressure loses its ability to create chaos. And that change didn't show up in possession numbers or highlight reels. It showed up in moments. Moments where mistakes didn't spread. Moments where games stayed intact. And that's when Manchester United began to handle pressure differently. Not by controlling it, but by surviving it long enough for control to become possible. The turning point came on 17 January 2026, at the Etihad against Manchester City. For years, this fixture had exposed the same contradiction. Manchester United tried to control matches that demanded humility first. They held high defensive lines without collective trust. They pressed aggressively without synchronization. They chased moments instead of managing sequences. Against City, that approach was unforgiving. One late step, one broken trigger, one space opening behind the line. In 2026, United arrived with a different intention, not to impose, but to survive intact. The defensive block dropped earlier, pressing became selective. The team stopped moving as if control could be manufactured through effort alone. This wasn't retreat, it was admission. Inside that structure, individual behavior changed immediately. Bruno Fernandes reduced his early risk actions, he resisted forcing vertical passes to recover authority. He prioritized circulation over reaction. At the back, Lisandro Martinez abandoned his old trigger. stepping forward to win the moment. Instead, he held depth, he protected space, he trusted the next phase to exist. Nothing about this looked comfortable, nothing about it looked dominant, but it was coherent. This was the Carrick principle, made visible. You don't accelerate the game when the structure cannot absorb the consequences. United didn't try to control Manchester City, they tried to remain recognizable, and that single decision altered the rhythm of the match. Mistakes still happened, they always do against City, but they didn't cascade, they didn't invite panic, they didn't pull the team apart. For the first time in this rivalry, United accepted that control could not be forced, and once that acceptance arrived, pressure stopped behaving like a trap and started behaving like a test. That's when the season changed its direction, not because United became better, but because they finally stopped asking the game to be something it wasn't ready to give them. The moment came on 30 November 2025, against Crystal Palace at their home stadium, when Mateta gave Crystal Palace a 1-0 lead from the penalty spot, but they came back stronger and dominated the game. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't decisive, it was a central turnover under pressure. The exact type of moment that used to end Manchester United's games. In previous seasons, this was where everything accelerated. One mistake triggered 3 reactions at once. The defensive line would drop instinctively. Fullbacks would sprint toward the ball, desperate to win the moment. Midfielders would abandon zones to chase responsibility. Structure didn't bend, it disappeared. Within seconds, the pitch stretched. Within moments, shots followed. In 2026, the response was recognizably different. The shape held, the backline resisted the urge to retreat early, distances between lines stayed compact. No one tried to correct the error individually. The fullbacks delayed instead of lunging, they didn't try to win the duel, they tried to slow the sequence. In midfield, priorities changed completely, not contact, not recovery sprints, lanes. Passing lanes were closed first, central access was denied, the game was compressed instead of expanded. The turnover still existed, the danger still existed, but it stayed isolated. United conceded fewer shots in the immediate seconds after losing possession, the most lethal window in elite football. The phase survived. That survival wasn't tactical cleverness, it was behavioral clarity. This was Carrick's logic in its purest form. Panic doesn't increase intensity, it reduces options. By staying calm, United preserved choices. By preserving choices, they preserved the match. And this is where the change became visible beyond United themselves. Opponents began to wait. They expected the second mistake, the emotional follow-up. But it didn't arrive. Fans noticed stability, analysts noticed spacing, opponents noticed something more unsettling. The moment that used to come for free now had to be forced. And forcing it changed how they played next. The moment arrived on 19 October 2025 at Anfield against Liverpool. The opening phases followed a familiar script. Liverpool pressed aggressively, high line, clear triggers, the usual attempt to force Manchester United into rushed decisions and emotional mistakes. In previous seasons, this pressure always produced something: a clearance under stress, a misplaced pass, a second action that arrived before the team had recovered its shape. Momentum used to grow from that chaos. This time, it didn't. United didn't try to beat the press to prove bravery, they didn't accelerate the game to show intent, they didn't force control when it wasn't there. They absorbed. The first wave passed, then the second, nothing broke. Clearances landed in safe zones, second balls were delayed, not chased, errors stayed isolated instead of becoming sequences. As the match moved into its middle phases, something subtle changed. Liverpool's pressing intensity dropped, not because of fatigue, because of uncertainty. The press stopped producing reward. Without mistakes to feed on, the tempo flattened. The emotional slope of the match disappeared. The game stopped escalating. United didn't dominate possession, they didn't dictate territory, but they controlled something more important: rhythm. They controlled how fast moments followed mistakes. They controlled how long pressure lasted. They controlled how much risk the opponent was willing to take. This is the Carrick principle in its quietest form. Stability is contagious. When one team refuses to collapse, the other begins to question how hard it should push. Liverpool didn't stop pressing because United beat them. They stopped pressing because the game stopped offering certainty. And that's where this phase of the rebuild becomes complicated. Because when opponents stop pressing out of confidence, they don't stop thinking. They wait. This is the phase supporters misunderstand most. Because progress is supposed to announce itself, it's supposed to look assertive, it's supposed to feel like control returning. Real rebuilds don't do that. They begin by taking things away. In 2026, Manchester United didn't add dominance, they removed behavior, they stripped out tactical improvisation. The moments where players abandoned the plan to rescue the game themselves. They reduced emotional hero actions, the presses, the sprints, the risky passes made to feel important rather than to stay stable. The football became quieter, flatter, less expressive. To many, it looked like regression. The clearest illustration came against Arsenal, the top league contender this season. United didn't control the match, they didn't dominate possession, they didn't impose rhythm, but they also didn't unravel. In previous seasons, this type of game would have provoked anxiety. Someone would have forced a press, someone would have stepped out of the structure to accelerate the moment, someone would have tried to fix the feeling. This time, no one did. The team accepted the tempo, they accepted the imbalance, they accepted that not every phase had to be won. From the outside, it looked passive, cautious, almost timid. Inside the rebuild, it was discipline. This is the Carrick warning phase, the most fragile point of any reconstruction, when stability exists but confidence hasn't arrived yet. Because once chaos is reduced, temptation returns. The temptation to accelerate, to layer ideas back on, to chase dominance before the structure can absorb failure. Most rebuilds collapse here, not because they lack quality, but because they confuse calm with readiness. Manchester United haven't reached that test yet, and that's why this phase matters more than any result. Because the hardest part of rebuilding isn't surviving chaos. It's resisting the urge to move too fast once chaos finally disappears. None of the fundamental problems have disappeared. Recruitment is still imbalanced, the midfield profiles still don't fully complement each other, the long-term identity remains unfinished. This is not a completed rebuild, and it's not close. But something far more important has changed. For the first time in years, Manchester United behave like a single unit under pressure. Mistakes no longer provoke internal correction, errors don't trigger emotional responses from different directions, phases don't collapse into individual solutions. The team stays together, even when the game doesn't go their way. That matters more than results. Because historically, this club has been torn apart not by opponents, but by its own reactions. And this is the first time since the era of Sir Alex Ferguson that United have stopped arguing with themselves on the pitch. Not verbally, structurally. In previous years, one mistake demanded urgency. Urgency demanded risk. Risk demanded correction. Now mistakes demand patience. Players wait for the next phase instead of forcing the next action. They trust the shape to survive. They trust the collective to absorb pressure. That's the Carrick reframing in its simplest form. Before you play better football, you stop making the game harder than it already is. Manchester United didn't fix everything, they didn't find a system that solves the league, they didn't suddenly become dominant. They reduced chaos, they reduced noise, they reduced self-inflicted damage, and that's why this rebuild finally feels real. Not because it's finished, but because for the first time, it's honest. And in football, honesty is the only foundation that lasts.